Hey, good morning, everybody. How we doing? Good. It's good to have you here on Super Bowl Sunday. Thanks for hanging out with us for a little bit. And because it is Super Bowl Sunday, it's time for a little bit of a Super Bowl prediction, all right? Some of you will never come back to this church again if you're brand new. This is something we like to do. It's a little bit of fun for us here. But we got a big game tonight, right? We got the Seahawks versus the Patriots. And I don't know if you know this, but you can actually predict the outcome of this game by looking at Scripture. Do you know that? Well, you're going to find that out right here. Here we go, Leviticus 11:13. These are the birds you are to detest because they are detestable. Eagle, the vulture, any kind of raven, the owl, the gull, any kind of hawk. Right? We don't even have to go any further. Pretty much settles it. Patriots are going to win. Not so fast, my friends. Look at Job 39. Doth the hawk fly by thy wisdom and stretch her wings toward the south? Seahawks are led by quarterback Sam Darnold, who has a ton of wisdom. He's only been in the league for 8 years, but he's been on 5 different teams over that course of 8 years. So he's got a ton of wisdom to bring to this game. And by the way, we're the Seahawks in the north. And where did they go? They flew south on a big jet plane to get down to California for the big game. So maybe the Seahawks. But what do we know about Seattle? It's got good coffee, but it rains. And rains and rains and rains. Psalm 11, on the wicked, the Lord will rain fiery coals and burning sulfur. Maybe the Patriots have a chance. Jeremiah 4, look, he advances like the clouds. His chariots come like a whirlwind. His horses are swifter than eagles/hawks. Woe to us, we are doomed. Patriots have second-year quarterback, Drake May, right? And he's able to do what Jaden Daniels wasn't able to do for the Commanders last year. He took the Patriots to the Super Bowl. And how's he coming in? On horses. Like who? Paul Revere, there in Boston. Victory formation. But alas, here comes the answer. It's in Jeremiah and Isaiah. Jeremiah 1:4. From the north, disaster will be poured out, right? There we go. Seattle's coming down from the north to California. But look at Isaiah 41. The Lord says, I've stirred up a leader who will come from the north, Sam Darnold. And check this out. I will give him victory over kings and princes and patriots. The Hebrew word for princes and kings is actually patriots. I don't know if you know that. That's not true, but just go with me here, okay? So with all this evidence that we have from Scripture, it's clear to see that wisdom and power is going to come down from the north. The Seahawks will defeat the Patriots. Rematch from 2015, I think it is. And I'm just going to reverse the score. 28-24, Seahawks win. All right, there you go. You can take that to the bank, take it to DraftKings, whatever you want to do. If you win, 10% to the church and 25% to me, okay? And by the way, we're not condoning any kind of gambling, but there you go. All right, a little fun as we get started. Hey, I want to keep talking about football because, again, we got a big game this evening. From 2010 to 2013, the Washington Commanders had a pretty good staff. In fact, they were called the super staff. You see some of the guys in that photo up there on the screen. Why were they called a super staff? Well, this is crazy about this particular team. The head coach then was Mike Shanahan. Here's who was on staff with him. Sean McVay, the Rams head coach. Kyle Shanahan, the 49ers head coach. Matt LaFleur, who's the Packers head coach. Mike McDaniel, who was the Dolphins head coach until this year. And Raheem Morris, again, was the Falcons head coach until this year. Just think about all those guys were coaching on that particular team from 2010 to 2013 here in Washington. Here's the cool part. Those guys in their positions actually multiplied themselves, and there are other coaches that came out of that line. Robert Saleh, D'Amico Ryan, Zach Taylor, Kevin O'Connell, Brandon Staley. Those guys have been or are head coaches in the NFL right now. Most of you don't know their names, and many of you don't even care about football, okay? You're going to watch for commercials and the halftime show with Bad Bunny. That's what you're looking for today. There you go, right? But think about that. From that coaching staff over those 3 to 4 years, you have multiple future Super Bowl appearances, 13 in fact. You actually have 4 of those guys who won Super Bowl rings. Many of them are now current NFL head coaches or still major coordinators within the NFL. And much of our offensive systems that we see today in football come out of that particular staff there with Mike Shanahan. What can we learn from this? 2 lessons. How terrible the Washington NFL franchise has been at letting some of the best coaches in the league go, right? Horrible at that. They could have some really great coaches. But more importantly, and to the point today, what we see here is really the power of multiplication. Today, as we finish this series, the series that's called DNA, Who We Are, we're talking about our values as a church. And this one today is called Tag Your It. And it's all about multiplication. Now, let me kind of define to you or give you our definition of Tag Your It. We would say it this way, that leadership and discipleship aren't meant to be carried out by a chosen few, but shared and multiplied. We identify, equip, and empower others to grow as leaders and disciples. Now, maybe you read that, you hear that, and you may think to yourself, I kind of understand it, but what does multiplication have to do with the church, and why are you talking about that? Why is that one of your values, and how do you live that out in this setting? Well, I think we have to start with the foundation. And the foundation of this value goes back to Matthew 28, which really has kind of been the backbone of this whole series that we have been in. That Jesus leaves this final command with his followers. And he says this in Matthew 28. He says, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you. And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the ends of the age. Look at those early words there. What does Jesus say? He says, go and make disciples. He doesn't say, sit and wait. He says, go and make. But as you read that, also notice he doesn't say, go and make one disciple. And you know what? If you make that one disciple, you're done. You're good. You've done everything I've asked you to do. You can retire. You got paradise waiting for you. This is wonderful. That's not what he says. He says, go and make disciples. There's an S there. He's talking about multiplication. He's saying, make disciples, who make disciples, who make disciples, who make disciples. And this continues on and on and on. That if we are a follower of Christ, we are called to make disciples in our life. For us here at The Journey, we say that through our vision statement. We've been talking about this throughout this series. We're a movement of people on mission together to help more and more people know and follow Jesus here in Northern Virginia. That we believe we are called to make disciples who make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. That is the mission that Jesus has called us to. And for us, that means living out that purpose, that vision of seeing more and more people know and follow him. Thus, this value, Tag Your It, which again is all about multiplication. Now, we can kind of set that background for what we're going to talk about today, but it's really better if we can see it in action. And I think we see that in Jesus' ministry, right? He starts out, it's just him. And I'm pretty sure Jesus could probably do it all himself, but he knows this is the way this is supposed to work. So what does he do? He goes out and he finds these 12 disciples. He picks these 12 disciples. We've talked about that in this series. They become followers of his. He's like, hey, this is what I need you to do. Be like me, act like me, live like me. I want you to go and make disciples, right? Make more disciples who are followers of mine. But it's not just those 12 that we find that Jesus invests in. In the book of Luke, we kind of find an interesting story that maybe you've heard about, maybe you skipped over before, but it really gives us an idea of what this multiplication looks like. This takes place here in Luke about 6 months before Jesus ends up in Jerusalem, where he is arrested and crucified. So he's kind of making his way to Jerusalem at this point. But we read this in Luke chapter 10, starting with verse 1. It says, the Lord now chose 72 other disciples and sent them ahead in pairs to all the towns and places he planned to visit. These were his instructions to them. The harvest is great, but the workers are few. So pray to the Lord who's in charge of the harvest. Ask him to send more workers into his fields. I'll spend a couple moments just kind of looking at these first two verses here, because as we see this, Jesus gives us the reason for this strategy of multiplication that I think he shares when he says, go and make disciples. What does he do here? He identifies the problem. See what he says there? The harvest is great, but the workers are few. He's like, there's so many people that are far from God. There's so many people who don't know me, and I can't do this on my own. And the 12 disciples can't do it on their own. Like, we've got to multiply ourselves so more and more people can know me. It was a problem then, 2,000 years ago, but it's a problem that we still face in our world today. That same issue is there. The harvest is great, but the workers are few. Let me kind of explain that in our context today. Data says that in 1972, a little bit less than half of Americans went to church on a weekly basis. I think that number is like 48, 49%. But in 2024, that number is down to 27% who attend church on a weekly basis. Research says that they're finding that each generation is less religious than previous generations. The harvest is plenty, but workers are few. Shared stats about Fairfax County before. 1.2 million residents here in this county. 60% are non-religious. Another 10% follow world religions. That means that there's 70% of the people who live in this county are far from Jesus. And then we got the 30% that are left over, right? I'm pretty sure 30% aren't fully following Jesus, but we're just going to go with that for just a second. But let's say that's true. That still means there's a harvest out there that is great and plentiful, but the workers are few. And that's right here in our own backyard. So here's Jesus, who's 2,000 years ago said, hey, there's a problem, right? But I think Jesus also sees there's an opportunity and there's a plan here. Go back to verse 1. The Lord now chose 72 other disciples and sent them ahead in pairs to all the towns and places he planned to visit. Some of you are confused because you're saying to yourself, well, I did think there was only 12 disciples. Like, what about these 72? Where are these people coming from? Well, Jesus had that core 12. He chose them. He invested in them. Basically, they spent every single day with him. Those are the people that we're familiar with and that we know. But here we find that there's this other group of disciples, this 72. Who are they? We don't know. They're unnamed. It's thought that maybe some of the names and people we're introduced to in the book of Acts, which is the story of the history of the beginning of the church, maybe some of those were part of the 72. But there's no list, right? We don't know who these are. And honestly, it doesn't really make much difference because Jesus chooses these 72 other followers, which meant there were more people that were following him than just these 12. They may not have been spending every single day with him. They may not have been kind of in this inner circle, but they were still following Jesus. Again, they were still disciples of Jesus. And so Jesus chooses the 72 and is like, all right, here's the deal. I'm going to send you out in pairs, and I'm going to send you to these towns and villages, and I want you to tell them about me. Basically, I want you to go and make disciples. Why is he doing this? Luke chapter 10, verse 2. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Those 12 couldn't handle it, right? So he sends out the 72, which, as we know, mathematically is more than 12. There were too few workers to get this work done. And so there's a strategy that Jesus has of multiplication. Hey, you 72, go out and make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. He tells them, he's like, hey, tag, you're it. And what was the outcome of this? Well, I want to look kind of at the history of Christianity and its growth over the past 2,000 years because honestly, it's been exponential in nature. Starts with Jesus, then he picks his 12 disciples, and then we read about these 72. And as we go in the book of Acts, we find after Jesus resurrects, we've got about 120 followers, and then the next day we've got 3,000 followers. By 1000 AD, we've got 50 million followers of Jesus. By 1900, 560 million followers of Jesus. 1972, 1.2 billion followers of Jesus. And today they say there's about 2.5 to maybe 2.7 billion followers of Jesus in the world. If 2,000 years ago Jesus had said, hey, go and make a disciple, we're not going to see this exponential growth of Christianity like we see today. It was all about multiplication. Go and make disciples who make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. And so Jesus tells these 72, he's like, go in these pairs, go out. I want you to pave the way for me. But what I want you to do is I want you to go and make disciples. He says, this is what this is going to look like. This is how this is going to go for you. This is what to look out for. And also, here's some instructions on what to do. Look back at verse 2 again. These were his instructions to them. The harvest is great, but the workers are few. So pray to the Lord who is in charge of the harvest. Ask him to send more workers into his fields. Here's the first step, right? If we're going to multiply disciples, if we're going to be the people who are followers of Christ, who make followers of Christ, who make followers of Christ, the beginning point for us is to pray that, hey, God, the harvest is great, it's plentiful, but the workers are few. Send more workers. Our church here, if we kind of look at us as an example, I mean, you guys know we're a transient church in a very transient area. Last summer, we saw one of our biggest transient moments here with government shutdowns and lots of PCSs that took place. So we saw actually 25% of our church weekly attendance average move last summer, about 150 people. Now, we're kind of used to this. We know that we've got about, 12, 13% to up to 20% of our church moves every year. It's just part of living here. It's part of the nature of a place like this. What does that mean? It means that one of the prayers that we pray is that God will send more workers to this place. We did a survey back in January. We asked you to fill it out. And we came back with some of the numbers, and one of them that stands out is that 56% of you say that you have been at this church less than 3 years. 56%. Can I tell you that we've been praying that God would send more workers, and so many of you are answers to that particular prayer. Jesus says this is where you begin, right? To make disciples, you make disciples, make disciples. The first thing that you do is you pray for God to send the workers. All of it begins with prayer. But then Jesus gives them a warning in verse 3. He says, now go and remember that I am sending you out as lambs among wolves. Probably the worst pep talk in the history of mankind, right? He's like, hey, the harvest is plentiful. You're my workers, and you're probably going to die. So hooray, go for it. It's going to be a lot of fun for you. And I'm sure the people hearing this, like, this is not what we signed up for. This doesn't sound like this is going to be a great opportunity for us. Here's Jesus says, it's not going to be easy. Oh, by the way, you're going to be dealing with people, and people are hard to deal with. They have their own desires and their own wants and their own theologies and ideas. He's basically saying, get ready for battle, because this is going to be tough for you. But then I think he kind of helps them along in verses 4 through 11. He says, don't take any money with you, nor a traveler's bag, nor an extra pair of sandals. And don't stop to greet anyone on the road. Whenever you enter someone's home, first say, may God's peace be on this house. If those who live there are peaceful, the blessing will stand. If they're not, the blessing will return to you. Don't move around from home to home. Stay in one place, eating and drinking what they provide. Don't hesitate to accept hospitality, because those who work deserve their pay. If you enter a town and it welcomes you, eat whatever is set before you. Heal the sick and tell them the kingdom of God is near you now. But if a town refuses to welcome you, go out into the streets and say, we wipe even the dust of your town from our feet to show that we have abandoned you to your fate. I feel like this is Jesus who's trying to alleviate some of those tensions and fears and the unknowns that these 72 have, as he says, hey, I want you to go and make disciples. Now, as far as we know, this is the first time he's done this. In Luke 9, the beginning of Luke 9, we do find he sends the 12 out, but we don't read about the 72 or him doing this in a big group setting any other point. So this is all new. But he's like, hey, this is going to be hard. This is going to be difficult. But I want to help you along. I want to give you some instructions that maybe will help you through those doubts and those concerns and some of those unknowns. As I'm reading this past week, I was asking myself, what is it that keeps us from multiplying disciples today? Let me share with you, I think, 3 struggles that are common for many of us who are followers of Jesus. First struggle, I believe, is we don't multiply disciples because we fear rejection. At the beginning of the series, we asked you, said, hey, who's your one? If you're a follower of Christ, who is your one? And I think about 60 of you so far have shared that with us. You can do that through the QR code or through our app. You're going to see a button there. You can just click on that and share with us who's your one. Who's the person in your life who is far from God but close to you? If you're a follower of Christ, that is your one. That is the person that God has put on your heart to help them know who Jesus is. However, you might have that one, and yet a spiritual conversation with them could be pretty tough. There's sort of these questions of, am I able to do this? How am I going to do this? What if they disown me? What if they don't want to talk about this? What if they get angry? What if they break this relationship apart? There's that fear that's there. And probably part of it is because we lack confidence. Like, how am I going to be a follower of Jesus, trying to teach someone else how to be a follower of Jesus when I really don't know the Bible that well? Man, my prayer life's not that great. I'm trying to do better in my own life, my own walk with Jesus, but it's not quite where I want to be. So how am I supposed to lead someone else when I don't think I'm quite ready for this? Let me kind of help you out by giving you an example. How many of you have ever put together IKEA furniture before? Anybody here? Yeah. We love the cost of IKEA, right? It's great because it's lightweight, and supposedly IKEA furniture is really easy to put together until you start to put it together, right? If you've done it before. Because they give you this little book, this little manual, and it's like a lot of photos, and not photos, but images. And they're basically drawings, and you're looking at this, and you're like, okay, I think that's the left side, but it's not working right, so maybe it's the right side, maybe it's the top, maybe it's the bottom, maybe it's underneath, maybe it's supposed to be somewhere else, and always they give you those little wooden dowels who never seem to fit right in the hole. You're like, maybe that's the wrong one. I'm like, no, but that's in the image there. I see that. You're pulling out like a sledgehammer to get that thing in there. Because I know this is where it goes. Like it feels like things don't fit right. Or maybe you've had a moment, I think we've had one or two pieces that didn't come with all the hardware that it was supposed to have. Like, well, I don't know how I'm going to do this. But you get done with this piece of IKEA furniture and you look at it, and this is your masterpiece, right? Sitting there in front of you, and what do you notice? It's a little crooked. And you touch it and it's a little wobbly. And you look at it and you're like, it's not quite perfect. But it is usable. You're able to use it for what it is created to do. I'm pretty sure those 72 people, they weren't having Bible studies with Jesus every single day. They weren't in some seminary learning how to do ministry. Here's Jesus who says, I've got this mission for you, right? And you probably don't feel like you're quite prepared for the task. You probably are thinking that you're not perfect for it or that you're ready for it. But really, you are. Tag, you're it. Go and make disciples. And they did. I'm guessing many of us probably think, well, I don't think I'm quite ready to make disciples. I don't think I'm quite perfect for this. I got a lot of work to do on myself. Well, those fears that we have of rejection, that lack of confidence that we have, like that can take over. But go back to Matthew chapter 28. The last thing that Jesus says there, he says, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. There's this reminder that even in the fear or of rejection or this lack of confidence, that Jesus will lead and guide us as we become people who make disciples, who make disciples, who make disciples. That, if we can be honest, you and I are kind of like a piece of IKEA furniture. Kind of crooked, probably a little wobbly, not quite perfect. But Jesus can use us to live out his mission. Maybe that's where you are. Maybe that's the struggle you have, is that lack of confidence or those fears. Another struggle I think we have is we don't multiply disciples because we're consumers of the church. I think sometimes people tend to approach church kind of like we approach Netflix. You know, you go to Netflix and you think, hey, this looks like a great movie. You turn it on, you realize it's dubbed in some other language. You're like, well, I'm going to go find another movie out of the 75,000 in their catalog. And you just keep looking and looking and looking until you find something that fits you perfectly. I believe we do the exact same thing with the church. We look at the church through consumeristic eyes. It's like, I don't like it. I don't like the music. I don't like worship. I don't like the person speaking. I don't like the kids' classes. I don't like the teen ministry. I don't like the things they do in the community. I don't like the taste of their coffee. So what do? I'm going to go somewhere else. Now, let me say, if you're beginning that process, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. You find the place that fits you. I know someday I'm not going to be a pastor anymore, and I'm going to have to go find a church to go to, and I'm going to have some questions. I'm going to have some things that I'm going to be looking for. But when we're consumeristic, even if we found a church that we like, we're usually always evaluating that church through this consumeristic lens. And so we look for this church that has this great content delivery and the excellence of programming and this optimized experience, and maybe we find it exactly what we're looking for. And even if we stick around, we don't give, we don't serve, we never join a group, we never invite someone. Why? Because I'm just consuming this product that is here and trying to make sure that it's right for me. For some of us that were followers of Christ, we kind of have spiritual amnesia. Like we forget about the vision of the church. We forget to live out the mission of Jesus. We forget we are called to multiply, to go and make disciples. who make disciples and make disciples. We're not called to go find the perfect church that fits everything that we need and everything that we're looking for and does everything, single thing on the checkbox we have. Maybe you find that place, but you may still be evaluating it mentally because many times we have that consumeristic mindset. And we don't live out the mission of Jesus if that's where our mind is consistently when it comes to the church. And I think that's why some of us struggle with multiplying disciples. But then the last struggle I would share with you is we don't multiply disciples because in the church world we think in terms of addition and not multiplication. There's sort of this idea in the church world that if we add a program, if we add a staff member, if we add an event, that more people will come. And if more people come, then that gives us a chance to disciple that person who's going to disciple that person who's going to make disciples, and make disciples. And I will let you know that there's a very small percentage of times that actually plays out. It does, but sometimes we think if we just add one more thing, then that will answer this question and the strategy of multiplication. That's not multiplication. That's addition. And in the long run, what we actually find is that addition in churches leads to subtraction in churches. Recent studies say that 33% of the churches in the United States report growth. And as they study those churches, here's what they find. They find that they are all about multiplying disciples and multiplying leaders. There are people in that church that live for that vision, and they are making disciples who make disciples who make disciples. 54% of churches in America today are declining. And if you look at those churches, so many, it's about adding one more thing. If we add a program, if we add an event, if we add a staff member, these things will take place. It's not why the church was created. It wasn't created to add. It was created for multiplication. Winfield Bevins, an author and a church planner, he said the church was established to be a movement of multiplying disciples. The church isn't about addition where we finish up a day like today and we're like, okay, how many people do we have today? And everything that we do and everything we're about is all about the numbers that are here. It's about living out the mission of Jesus. It's about multiplying followers of Jesus. That healthy churches are multiplying churches. Healthy churches are churches where people in the church, they own the mission of Jesus. We're going and making disciples who make disciples who make disciples. That is all about multiplication. And yet sometimes we get stuck in the mathematics of addition. So how do we live this out practically? I think the best way to explain this is actually to tell you a little bit of a story. And it's a story that's actually connected to us here at The Journey. If you were here for our 50th birthday bash back in January of last year, we had these guys up on stage. This is Troy and Janet McMahon. And they told a really great story. And I'm going to share parts of that and then add a little bit to it for us to understand this idea of multiplication. Troy and Janet, they moved here from, I think, Kansas City to Springfield. He was going to work for Naval Reactors. And he grew up in a church and knew that when he got here, he needed to find a church. And so ends up here in Springfield and ends up at this church. Now, at the time, it wasn't known as the Journey Church. It was actually known as Central Christian Church and looked a little bit different than it does today. Troy talks about this guy he worked with, a guy named Todd Wilson. They were both Naval Reactors. Well, as they came together and met each other, one of the very first things they had to do was go to Pittsburgh to do some schooling and training. And so for 26 straight weeks, they would travel up there together and they would travel back. Well, Troy tells how every single Friday evening as they were driving back from Pittsburgh to Springfield, he would ask Todd this question. He said, Todd, would you go to church with me this weekend? And if you were there that day, you remember Troy said for 26 straight weekends, Todd said, no, I'm not going to come. Well, they finished up their training. They started their jobs here at Naval Reactors. And Troy was like, I just felt like that was my one. That was the person that I was supposed to do everything I could to help understand what it means to follow Jesus. And so Troy's like, I just kept asking Todd every single Friday, hey, Todd, why don't you go to church with me this weekend? Todd kept saying no until finally one day he said yes. If you were here, Troy said he thinks the reason Todd said yes is so Troy would stop asking him to go to church with him every single weekend, right? Well, Todd and his wife, Anna, end up showing up here on a Sunday morning. And 2 months later, they were baptized here in this church. Like, that's an incredible story. And again, for you, if you have your one, Maybe that's a story that you can hold on to. No, hey, don't give up. Keep doing everything you can to reach your one. But we also see multiplication, right? We see a disciple who makes a disciple. But again, great story, but it's not end of the story here. Brett Andrews was the associate pastor at that time here. Part of his role was to oversee the teen ministry. The rumor was that he didn't like teens at all, but it was just something he had to do. And so he goes to Troy and his wife Janet, and then Todd and his wife Anna, and he goes to them and he's like, hey, why don't you guys lead the teen ministry here? Kind of that tag you're it moment. And both those couples jumped in and started leading that ministry and did that for a couple of years. Like I talked about a little bit earlier, though. Transient church, transient place. Troy and Todd actually leave the area. Troy goes into the secular workforce, gets out of the military and works in Chicago, I think with General Mills. In his time there, they started going to a church in the Naperville area. That church actually hires Troy to be on staff with them. He has a big role in their leadership there. And then he and Janet move back home to Kansas City, where they plant a church. And then they end up actually starting a church planting network there in Kansas City. It's still going today, and they're still leading that church in Kansas City. But I want to go back to Todd for a moment. Brett Andrews, who was here, wanted to go plant a church. And so this church said, yep, we're going to bless you to go plant this church. And so Brett and his family moved to Centerville and planted a brand new church called New Life Christian Church up in Centerville, not too far from here. But over a little bit, Brett's like, I need an executive pastor. I need somebody who can help me kind of do the day-to-day and the operations and keep us moving forward. He calls up a guy named Todd Wilson. He's like, hey, Todd, I know you're still working for Naval Reactors. I know you're in Maine. I'd love for you to quit your job when you can, and I want you to come down here, and I want you to be our executive pastor. Todd's like, I'm going to do that. Another one of those tag you're it moments. So Todd leaves that role, comes down here with Anna and their family. He's the executive pastor at New Life for a few years. While he's there, they started an organization called Passion for Planning. It was all about helping churches get started, not just in the area here, but all over the United States. In his time there, he steps down out of that role as executive pastor, and he takes over this leadership role as the executive director for Exponential Conference. Exponential Conference happens every single year. It's full of thousands of church planners, and every year they help plant over 1,000 churches throughout the world, just through the work that they do and the network they have. Todd actually leads that particular organization and that conference. There's other things that Todd is doing. I think back to that moment, or those moments where Troy asked him over and over again, hey, come with me to church, come with me to church, come with me to church. And finally he says yes. And how God uses that. Troy saying, I'm going to multiply disciples and multiply disciples. And you look at Todd's life, and I actually ended up at New Life for a period of time. Todd was my executive pastor, my supervisor, very scary supervisor, by the way, if you've ever been around naval reactor people. But I learned a lot in a couple of short years with him. But I've watched Todd and how God has used his life as he's multiplied disciples. And multiply disciples and multiply disciples. He's multiplied leaders and multiplied leaders and multiplied leaders, churches and multiplied churches and multiplied churches. You see God's work in that. When we say tag you're it, that's what we're talking about. It's about multiplication. Now, maybe your story is not going to be like Todd's, and that's okay. But your story can be that you invested in someone as a follower of Jesus. You made a disciple who's making disciples, who God uses in incredible ways in this world. Well, what does this mean for us? As you think about Todd, as you think about this, I think, strategy of multiplication that we see with Jesus, I think there's a few things we can take from this. First, if you're a follower of Christ, tag your one. Know who your one is. And knowing that when you are reaching your one, you're making a disciple. Who's then called to make a disciple, who's then called to make a disciple and to make a disciple. This is how the good news of Jesus is spread. This is how the good news of Jesus has been spread for 2,000 years and will continue on way after we are gone from this place. Jesus' strategy is multiplication. And so you focusing on your one, tagging your one, is the starting place for this. The other thing I would say is that when you get asked to serve or lead here at the Journey, that's really a tag you're at moment. Talked about this last week. It's not about filling a spot or filling in some volunteer matrix. It's saying, hey, we see something in you. We'd love for you to jump in and serve. We'd love for you to step in and lead. That's part of discipleship that takes place when we are gathered together in these service teams or leading together in some ways. That's discipleship that's happening there. Care that's happening from staff and other leaders and volunteers. But as we said in that definition of tag you're it, it's the multiplication of leaders too. In fact, over the next 6 months, starting on Tuesday, actually, our staff is working with an organization to help us with our leadership pipeline. We know that's a hole we have. We know that's something we're not great at. We're working hard at, but we don't know how to quite do it yet. And so we've got an organization that's coming in who's going to help us work on that for the next 6 months because we believe that's going to help us disciple better so that we're not looked at to do the work here. Because we're saying, hey, we're in this together. We own this mission together. And so we're multiplying disciples and we're multiplying leaders. That is what we believe God has called us to do. And then lastly, I'd say you might feel like IKEA furniture, but know you're worthy of the mission of Jesus. I'm not ready. I don't think I can do this. Someone else needs to take this up. I'm not confident. I feel rejection. Look, you're never going to be ready. I think all of us are like IKEA furniture. We're never going to be ready. We're never going to be perfect, but we can be used by God if we allow God to use us. If we allow God to work in us, to use us to help more and more people know and follow him. To say, I know I'm not perfect. I may not be ready, but God, you can use me in this mission that you've called us to. I hope that you will take the chance or the time to live one of those out in your own life. And here's why. When we follow that calling in our lives, here's what happens. Go back to verse 17, Luke 10. When the 72 disciples returned, they joyfully reported to him. They go to Jesus and say, hey, Jesus, let us tell you the stories of everything that happened. And if you go back and you read Luke 10, you read about those stories and everything Jesus did. But here's the deal. What we celebrate when we lived out this mission is way better than a Super Bowl trophy. That we get to celebrate what God is doing in us, how we're being changed and transformed. But we get to celebrate what God is doing through us in the world around us as we make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. That is the power of multiplication. That is the power of saying, hey, tag, you're it. The harvest is great, but the workers are few. And so tag, you're it, as we do all we can to harvest what's in front of us.